Welcome to the second part of our sign making tutorial about making a piece of acrylic, milling it on the CNC in order to fit some LED strip and then cover it with a special silicone tube. In the first part I have shown you how to modify the font, how to recreate it in Inkscape and then import it into FreeCAD in order to get the consistent width channels required. We have also created some holes in the end of each word to fit the wires and some holes for fixing the piece of acrylic onto a piece of wood. It's the way it's going to be installed in the end. And in this video I will show you how to create the path from start to end and how to mill it on the CNC. The biggest challenge was milling a piece with a 2.1 meters length on a CNC that only has a table of 80 by 80 centimeters. That's my CNC. It's pretty small. I have customly built it this way because I have a small workshop, but I need to make certain things larger from time to time, so I will show you the method that I use to make that. One of the biggest challenges when milling acrylic is the cutter, the feed speed, the spindle speed. So let me explain you a little what I have used. I have used a 4mm end mill, and the speeds that I used with that cutter are 2500 millimeters per minute and the spindle speed of 11,000 RPM. I've used those values with a step down of 1.5 millimeters. Those are the values that I found suitable for this type of material on my machine. You might want to modify them a little to adjust them depending on the machine, on the cutter that you have, but for this type of cutter and my machine, this works like a charm when cutting acrylic. If you want to give me a financial help, you can anytime subscribe to my Patreon account. There you will find, besides a little help for me of course, you will find all the files that I'm creating in my videos. You can download them, study them. And if you are not ready to subscribe yet, you can find two products, one small thanks and one big thanks, if you want to support me with just a one-time small amount. So let's get started. I will select the body, the sign, go to the CAM workbench and create a new job. Everything seems okay, but it isn't, because I want the sign to be on the y-axis. I want it to be rotated on the y-axis because that's the direction that has clearance. I can move the piece of acrylic outside of the table. So first of all, click OK on the job. We will come back later at the job to edit the tools and everything else that needs to be edited. But first let's go to the job, open the tree, open the model, select the copy of the body that has been automatically created, go to edit, placement and rotate it around the z-axis 90 degrees. Click on apply, click on OK, and now double click on the job again, go to the setup tab and click on the refresh button next to extend models bounding box. Now we need to place the origin here, so I will zoom in, select the point in the corner and click on the set origin button. Now you can see that the origin is correctly placed. The piece of acrylic is vertical, it's on the y-axis just as I want, so I can move it outside of my CNC. And now let's go back to the tools menu, click on add to add a new tool controller to the job. I will select the 4mm end mill, as I've told you that's what I'm going to use. It's an upcut bit. Click on open and let's give the horizontal and vertical speeds of 2500 millimeters per minute and the spindle speed of 11,000 RPM. I can now remove the default tool, I don't need it anymore. Go back to the setup tab. Here at the bottom you have default values. I will set a step down of 1.5 millimeters. I want to set it for the entire job so I won't make any mistakes and maybe damage the cutter. I have broken several tool bits when trying to find the right solution for milling acrylic. I will also set a clearance of 35 and a safe height of 33 millimeters. Go to the output tab, make sure the processor is the correct one. I won't enter a file name, it will default to the file name of the FreeCAD file, so it's okay for me. And click on OK to close the job. Now we need to make three operations. The first one is to mill the holes, the small holes in the end of the letters for passing the cables, the large holes for fitting the piece to the piece of wood. We also need to make the pockets and the profiling, the cut of the outside, the weird shape that we have created for making a fun shape for this sign. So the first thing that I need to do is click on the job, go to the helix button. It will take some time to open up the dialog because FreeCAD tries to automatically detect all the circular holes in my file. So I have all the 4mm hole for the cables and the 10mm holes for the screws. Go to the operation tab, change start from outside to inside. I don't want to have a little piece of acrylic left in the middle because it might break, move around in the space and maybe damage the cutter. Leave the step over to 50%, click on apply, and you can see that the path for milling all the holes has been generated. Click on OK. The operation is all that I need, and now let's create the pocket. For making the pocket, I will set a top view and holding Ctrl down, select all these faces that compose the text, the comma, the dots at the end. Make sure you select just the faces, not lines. And now, after making sure everything is selected, I will use the pocket button. I will modify the pattern, set it to offset. Zigzag in such thin spaces would be a mess. Set a step over of 70%. That should be enough in order to correctly clear the inside. The outside will be cleared anyway because it's set the pattern to offset. Go to the depth tab, make sure you have the correct step down, the correct start depth and the correct final depth. I want 5 mm deep channels in the acrylic, so it's okay, a start depth of 10 and the final of 5. I will also check the min travel. I want to reduce the air time as much as possible. The movement when the cutter head is not cutting, I want it to be as small as possible, because anyway it is a pretty large project and it will take some time with such a small tool. And I can now click OK to generate the path for the first time. It will take a lot because FreeCAD is not the best when working with Bezier shapes. So once the path is generated, let's make sure everything is okay. I kind of know where there are some problems. You can see here at these holes, since the cutter head won't fit through this small piece of acrylic next to the holes, it simply won't cut this whole piece, which is something that I don't want. It happens around all the holes. You can see here also the lines, the comma. So double click on the pocket shape again, go to extensions, check enable extensions. I know this is an intense computing thing and it will take some time, but is something that I have to do. But unfortunately the extensions simply don't work. You can see here it won't see any edge to extend even though there should be. So we have to find another solution. Click on cancel. Don't ask me why FreeCAD is recomputing everything. When clicking cancel, it should just revert to whatever was in the first place, but this is the way it does things. And now I'm going to show you a trick that only works in FreeCAD 0.22, but since it has been released, all the versions just keep rolling, you can use it pretty safely. Let's go to the pocket where I create these holes, right click and select suppressed. Then right click on the body and recompute the object. Also right click on the job and recompute the job. But there are some issues with the pocket because the face names have changed and the code in the CAM workbench hasn't yet been changed with the topological naming problem solved. So let's clear the list and re-add the faces again. Click on OK, and now the path should be generated correctly. Of course, you can see that all the holes at the ends of the letters are now not included in the helix operation, and that's something I will show you in the end when exporting the job, how to solve that issue by exporting the Gcode files with different features in the body, suppressed or not. So now my CNC will mill the entire shape of the letters, no stopping at the end where the holes were. Of course, I will have to make separate exports for the pocket shape and the helix. I could open the properties of the pocket shape, and as you might have seen in all my other videos, when milling wood I always change the keep tool down from false to true. This time I won't do that because I'm milling acrylic and the lifting of the cutter head gives the cutter bit some time to cool down in order to avoid sticking the material to the cutter head. So this time keep tool down is okay to be left to false, even though it might take more time, it's safer this way. Now let's do the final operation, the profiling. Just leave everything as is. Click on apply and you can see the profile milled. You can also add some tags that you can cut by hand, but for holding down the material on the table I will use all these holes. I will first mill them, then stop the machine, put screws into these holes, also drill some holes in the outside pieces, at the edges of the outside pieces, in order to not damage too much material, because all these large pieces can be reused, of course. And now I want to export all the operations needed. As you remember, the holes in the ends of the letter are not available anymore, but I will show you how to split the operation into 3 separate files so I can move the sign around. There's one more thing that I need to do in order to correctly shift the piece after milling the first part and after milling the second one. I need to add some reference points, and because this piece is 2.1 meters long, I will divide it into 3 separate cuts, 700 millimeters each. So I need to somehow add some reference points, and I don't want them to be on the piece itself. Of course, I could anytime use the comma as a reference point, these holes as a reference point, but let's imagine that I don't have all these shapes at the exact same Y value, because the X will be the same. I will have a stopper here on the X axis, so the X will be the same, but I will need to manually adjust the Y axis. So let's go to the part design workbench, create a new body, create a new sketch on the XY plane, of course, make a rectangle, and I will give it a 500 by 2100 millimeters dimension. This is the dimension of our stock. Click on close, make a pad of 10 millimeters, and now you can see it covers the other sign, is fitting onto this piece. And I want to place 2 small cutouts here and here in order to be able to align when moving the part. So select this face, create a new sketch, and as I've told you, I want to split this cut into 3 separate cuts, each 700 millimeters, but I will actually create 3 cuts of 750 millimeters because I want some overlapping where the reference points will be. So I will create 2 rectangles. For now I will leave them just as they are. Let's give these rectangles an equal constraint for the bottom line, an equal constraint for the vertical line, and let's set a horizontal constraint. I want them to be at the same height. And you can see it's something odd that happened because I used a horizontal constraint, but if I look at the coordinate system here in the bottom corner or here at the orientation cube, I'm actually rotated. So I have to delete this horizontal constraint, move them again, and set a vertical constraint, because this is the vertical of my sketch. And now I will give this bottom line, let me rotate the view so it's easier to use the correct shortcuts, I for a vertical distance constraint of 5 millimeters, and the length of this segment I want it to be 10 millimeters. So my reference points are now correctly sized. I just want to position them. For this one I will give a height of 710 millimeters. I will make the first cut 750, but then just move the piece 700 and it will start below this reference point, so I can move the cutter head to the correct position and make sure I have moved the piece as it should. And for the second reference point I will give it a height of 1420 millimeters. It still has a degree of freedom, that is the horizontal distance. I will set a length of 490 just to be at the edge to waste as little material as possible. Now I will close this body. You can see these 2 reference points, I have to make some pockets with them. I will make 5 millimeters pockets, and I will rename the body reference points. And now go back to the job to use those reference points. Double click on the job, go to the general tab. Everything will move pretty slow right now. I will show you in just a couple of seconds how to avoid this slow movement when making modifications into your job, such as adding a new body. But now I have to wait, and then I'll show you how to do things faster. For each modification it will take a long time to calculate everything. I will just click cancel. Again, it will take some time. I should have done this before opening the job. So before opening the job and modifying all the stuff here, I will select all the operations, go to the CAM workbench of course, and click on this button, toggle the active state. I want them to be disabled, and now everything will compute much faster. So now double click on the job, go to the general tab, click on edit button, also add the reference points body, click on OK. You can see how fast everything moved. Of course, when re-enabling all these operations, I will have to wait for them to recompute, but it's going to be just a one-time thing. So now I have the body with the reference points. Go back to the job. This is the part where I have to re-enable all the operations. Well, I won't re-enable the helix because I will export the helix later. As you remember, I have removed some holes from here and the helix won't mill them. I will activate them after exporting the pocket and the profile. I need to create a new operation. I need to mill these holes. So simply select them, go to the pocket operation, select offset, leave a step over of 100, it doesn't really matter. Click on OK, and now you can see the milling of the two pockets for reference is set. Of course it mills both of them in the operation, but we will limit them in just a couple of moments. Make sure the pocket shape is selected in the tree, go to the CAM menu, path dress up, and select the boundary dress up. By default I have extensions of 1 mm on all sides and the constraint to inside checked. If I use this setting here where the final shape is barely touching the edge, the cutter head won't fit and it won't cut this piece, so I will extend the start of the X with 4 mm, the diameter of my cutter head, and also the extension on the Y at the beginning is going to be 4 mm. The Z I will leave it with 0 extensions, I don't care about the extensions on the Z axis. For the end extension of the X axis I don't need to make any extension, the cutter head will fit okay. But I want to extend the Y on this direction to mill just 750 mm. I don't have an option to set a distance from the origin, just a distance from the end. I have created this piece, the reference body, I have created it with a length of 2100 mm. So if I want here to have 750 mm, I will subtract, and I will use parentheses to be easier to understand, the total length minus what I want to mill. I want to mill 750 mm, so I want the extension to move with all the remaining length that there is. So now I can click apply, click OK. You can see it has limited this operation to only the first reference point. Now let's enable the pocket and the profile. The operations are active again, you can see them here, but for the profile I have to make some modifications. You can see it also cuts the outside of the reference point's body. I don't want that, so double click on the profile operation, go to base geometry, and let's find a way to only mill this face. So move the mouse around until you can select only this face, click on add, click on apply, and now it will ignore the other shape. If I don't add any geometry, it will automatically mill the outlines of all the bodies in the job. So now I can click OK, everything is okay. I just want to also limit these two operations to the length of my CNC table for the first part, so select each of them. Unfortunately, there's no option to use the dress up for a group of operations, but I have a little thing that will speed things up. Select the profile, go to the CAM workbench, go to path dress up boundary, and instead of extend models bounding box, I will choose use existing solid. And from the drop down list I will use the stock that has been created for the previous operation, for the previous boundary dress up, and now I can click on OK. You will see the profile limited to this boundary too. Make sure that it's going to cut at these edges, everything should be okay. Here it ends and it only cuts this part. Let's do the same for the pocket. Go to CAM, path dress up, boundary, do the same thing, select use existing solid, select the same stock. You can also select the one from the previous operation, but just use the base one, the first one that you have created, because for the next two steps, the next two cuts, we will modify just that stock in that operation and it will automatically update all the other operations. This makes everything much faster. And now you can see that all my operations are limited to the 750 millimeters first cut. I also have a reference point here which will give me the coordinates for the next operations. I now export each of these operations. I prefer to export them into separate files. In order to export them into separate files, I have to go to the job, go to the output tab, check the split output button and change order by to operation. This way it will create one file for each of the operations. I think it's much safer and I can make a pause between operations to move some clamps, to add some screws or whatever I'm doing on the CNC. And now I can select the job, click on the post-process button. It will generate 3 separate files, one for each of the operation. You can see here I will save them one by one and I can move to the CNC to mill the first part. Well, not exactly, because I haven't created the helix. I will create it after exporting all the 3 pieces for the pocketing and the outline and the reference points. I will then go back to the initial body, modify, re-enable the pocket for the holes at the ends of the letters, and then reapply everything, the limitations, so I can have also the files for the holes, because I will first drill the holes, fit the piece piece of acrylic to the table using those holes for screws, and then I will mill the pocket and the outline. So now how do I move everything so I know how to correctly position everything? Well, open the job, select the model, the body, go to edit, placement, and for the Y subtract 700 millimeters. As I've told you, I want some overlapping here, so I have created the cuts using a 750 millimeters boundary, but I want some overlapping, so I will only be moving it 700 millimeters. Click on OK. It will take some time to recompute everything. We will have to do the same for the second body for the reference points, because I want the second reference point to be milled. Let's also move the reference points, go to edit, placement, and subtract 700 from the Y. And now, after moving also the second body, the stock from the dress up has been correctly calculated, otherwise it would simply subtract from the position of the second body. Now that everything is correctly placed, you can see I will be able to mill the second part. I also have the reference point milled, and that's very important because when moving the stock after making the first operation, I will go to the Gcode for this operation and I will check the X value for milling this small space, move the cutter head to that position by hand and make sure the stock is correctly placed, and the cutter head will just touch this face that, as you know, is already milled from the previous operation. It will also mill the second reference point, and this way I will be able to mill everything without losing position, actually with a proper movement of the position. So now I will export these files too. I will rename them to step 2, and then after doing this I will repeat what I already did. Go to the model, go to edit, placement, subtract another 700 millimeters, do the same for the second body, and I will have the third operation with a reference point included in it, so I can move to the Gcode, see the coordinate, move the cutter head manually to that position and make sure it aligns with the stock that I have moved. Now let's also move the reference point's body. Go to edit, placement, subtract another 700 millimeters. And as you can see, the third reference point is included in my cut. I can use it to position the cutter head there and then move the stock around on the Y-axis as I've told you, and as you can see in the images, I have a limiter, a straight line on the Y-axis, so I can keep the same X anytime in any position for the stock. As you know, I still have something to do, the helix. I haven't exported the holes and I for sure need them in order to be able to keep the material to the table and because they are needed for the project. So select all these 3 dress ups, disable them, change their status from active to inactive, and then re-enable the helix. But I only have the large holes because, as you remember, I have disabled this pocket. So right click on it, click on suppressed, right click on the body, go down to recompute object. Now go back to the job and click recompute object, and all the holes appeared and the helix is milling them as it should. Now let's do the limitation, the dress up, the boundary for the holes too, because I need the exact same dress up. This weird line here is because this is where my origin is. So I will export them in reverse order. Go to the helix, go to CAM, path dress up, boundary, select from the boundary body, use existing solid, just as we did with the previous operations. Select the stock here, click on apply, OK, and surprise, one of the nice things in FreeCAD, there are a lot of bugs, but you can work with them. There are a lot of workarounds for each of the bugs. So in another software I would probably be blocked here, I wouldn't be able to do what I want to do, but I can find a lot of workarounds in FreeCAD, so this is the nice thing. Even though there are a lot of bugs, I can solve them using other methods. So the dress up path is not something that works on Helix for now in this development version. Of course, probably in the final version it will work, but for now dress up on Helix in 0.22 doesn't work. So I will delete the dress up, select the Helix, and I will do a little trick. Open another operation, make its stock visible, go to the helix, go to the base geometry, so select all the holes, almost all the holes, click on remove. Now I will select the remaining ones, click on remove again, it moves kind of slow. And now let's manually add. Well, it seems I cannot manually add holes to the helix in 0.22, which is something that I don't like, but there still is a way of doing things. Click on reset to recreate all those holes that it automatically generates, and then we will have to manually delete the ones that are not inside our stock, the ones that we have reused from the dress up operations. Remove all the holes that are outside, export this job, then do the same for the second placement. Move the body back a little bit higher with 700 millimeters. Remove all those other holes. So let's see which one is highlighted. Remove. After removing all the holes, I can now see that the operation is limited correctly to this shape. Well, it's not limited, it's something that I have to do manually, but I can live with it. I'm sure it will be fixed very soon. Click on OK. Now export the operation and let's change everything again. Let's move the body. This time I will add 700. I want to move it back high. Also move the reference point's body. Also add 700. Click on OK. And because the dress up doesn't work, I have to go to the helix again, go to the base geometry, reset everything, then remove all the holes and so on for this operation too, and then do the same for the last part, the last remaining part. So after removing all the holes outside of this dress up, I will move to the third part, do the same for the first piece of the sign. I have exported them in reverse order now because, as you remember, I have disabled the helix in order to be able to mill the pockets correctly. So now I do this in reverse. Make sure you save the file correctly. So then I will go to the machine, drill the holes. I can use these 10mm holes for holding the piece to the table, but before milling the pocket I won't be able to use these holes because the cutter head will move through here to mill the pocket and it will hit the screw. So I will just use one screw, still use the clamps that I've used initially, and only after milling the pocket I will be able to use these holes to hold the piece down with screws for the final pass, the profiling. So thank you for watching. I hope it was a nice project for you too. I loved making it even though it was challenging, but that's what I like to do, to discover ways of doing challenging stuff. And don't forget to subscribe, and of course remember that you can always help me on my Patreon account. Go there and subscribe. You will have access to all the files that I'm making in my videos, and if you don't feel like subscribing yet, you can anytime just buy one of the two products in the shop section. Thanks or a big thanks. It's a one-time payment which will help me, of course, for sure. Thank you for watching and see you next time.